See here? To be here tonight. I'm just gonna hope the tech works and that everyone can now see
Gonna go get the price.
my screen with a bunch of pink and black on it. Is that a yes? Great. Awesome. Well, as Larry said, I'm Mickey, and I'm here with Stronger Stories advisor Jennifer, and we're just excited to be talking to you tonight about some of our very favorite topics, which is storytelling, and hopefully give you some tools that you can use in your job hunt. So, we will go ahead and jump into it. And as Larry said, we're going to get your target job role in the chat. And then if you want to, whatever you want to get out of this session. And Jennifer, I wonder if you want to introduce yourself and say hi before I start jumping into more of the content that we have to cover tonight.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Again, Jennifer Strachan. Very good, Larry. Doesn't always look like it is or sound like it's spelled. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm here as a friend and advisor to Stronger Stories, as Mickey said, but also just in my history of working within media and storytelling, but also that have been advising and mentoring all sorts of leadership groups throughout my career, have seen a million folks and resumes and stories and done a bunch myself. So I'm hopeful that I can be helpful in this conversation today. So when Mickey's talking, I'm going to try and maybe jump in the chat and we'll go back and forth. So if you have anything, I'm going to try and keep track and she'll do the same for me.
Absolutely. Great. So we're going to get into what we're covering tonight. And in true story style, we have 5 chapters. And I would say it's quite a lot of content. It's probably more of a crash course than a community chat. And the slides are purposely quite text heavy so that you can refer to them afterwards. And Larry will be able to send them out to everybody, right, so that they can go back to them. And we'll also point you to other tools that are on our website as well. And the idea behind all of this stuff that we're sharing is that Stronger Stories has built it working in collaboration with our clients over the last 6 or 7 years. So this includes hundreds of entrepreneurs who are in really early stages of their businesses that have gone on to grow, all the way up to big global organizations like the United Nations Development Program, Wiley & Sons, which is a large international publisher, and the UK's innovation arm. So we've developed these tools as a way to make storytelling simpler, recognizing that it is both an art and a bit of a science. So I would say as we go through this, don't feel, if we're throwing a lot at you, don't feel like you need to absorb it all. You can come back to it. And also you can take the pieces that are going to be most helpful for you based on where you are in your career journey. So anything in the chat we should talk about, Jennifer, before we jump in? Nope.
I think we're good to go.
Great. Okay. So the first section, we're going to talk a bit about the power of story. And stories have been really integrated into the way that we've evolved as humans. If you think about something like a design portfolio or a resume and how long that's been around versus the thousands and thousands of generations that we've told stories, that's just a tiny little blip of it. And sometimes I think what can happen when we see one of those templates, we sort of forget the fundamental art of the human storytelling that has driven us for all of our evolution. And it's so fundamental into the way that we see the world, build community, process information, that neuroscientists have actually found that there are patterns built into our brains that we are hardwired to recognize. And these patterns are mental shortcuts that equip us to make decisions, process what our world is like, and ultimately why that matters for job hunters is that it influences decisions like who we hire when we're interviewing and seeking to fill a role. The good news is that these patterns are highly influenceable by the stories that we tell. And I've got a few quotes here about stories, but probably the most important one is Daniel Kahneman, who was a Nobel Prize winning behavioral economist. And he found over many, many studies that as much as we believe we make decisions because we are rational and we are data driven, actually, we are also very emotional and irrational decision makers. And what we see again and again is when people are trying to make a case or convince somebody of something or sell something, they go into a lot of the data and the numbers, but they forget the story side. So that's what we're here to bring tonight. So, starting with three basic building blocks of a story. I've got three up here: character, conflict, and resolution. And in our language, and I'll introduce a little bit more of this in a minute, we would also call this everyday hero, compelling villain, and better world. What's really interesting about these elements of story is that each of them activates a different bit of chemical in our brain. And I think this is important to think about, especially when you're telling the story of you, is what you're doing with the way that you're telling your story. So here we have, for example, Luke Skywalker. He lives in space. We've never been to space. I've never been to space. Can't relate to that. But what I can relate to is being a bored teenager. And he is a very bored teenager stuck on a desert planet. He's a moisture farmer on a desert planet. And he wants to get out. So when we hear those kind of details that we can relate to, it releases oxytocin in our brain, which is the love hormone, the empathy hormone. Studies have also shown that when we see a character we relate to, our brain patterns follow the same thing as if we were going through the journey ourselves. So the reason that this is important, I think particularly for job hunters, and Jennifer will be talking more about this a bit later, is that you want to make yourself a hero that your audience is going to root for. And you want to make sure that you're relatable and that you're releasing that oxytocin, that love hormone. Villains activate cortisol, which is the pay attention hormone. And that is important in the story because it makes us feel like there's stakes and that we want our hero to succeed. And your resolution or your better world releases dopamine, which is the happiness hormone. So if you take nothing else away, I think those three blocks and making sure that they're very solid is helpful for your job hunt. And I know that because I actually used them on my last job hunt. So we've got another, we're going to ask you to put something else in the chat, which is thinking about your favorite everyday hero. If they're fictional or real, how can you relate to them? And can most people relate to them, or is it just something that you think is specific to you? So Jennifer, I'll let you tell me what's in the chat since I'm screen sharing and I can't see it.
Okay, we'll give folks a moment because I know this one's kind of a thinker if you haven't thought about it. And some people go naturally to people they know. It could be a mentor, it could be a real person in their life, but sometimes it's really like, oh my gosh, my favorite, hero is, could be anyone. It could be Indiana Jones, it could be Gandhi, it could be somebody like that. So I've worked in entertainment, so we did an exercise where it seemed easier to find a fictional hero, but then
Yes.
some of those real life heroes can be kind of come more naturally. Ooh, Larry, yes. Michelle Obama. I think you'd get a lot of likes to that one. She seems like a real person, agree, but with very high ideals and intellect that she lives every day. Yes.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting too about the people that's that relatability, there's something there that makes us feel at ease, and yet she's super inspiring. We're going to talk about that a little bit later as well.
I can also say one of my favorites is Harry Potter. And one of the reasons that I would relate to him is that he didn't really feel like he had a friend group or a family before he went on sort of the adventure of school and sort of found his found family. And also, like the broken glasses, not quite fitting in, I can definitely relate to that. Are there
Yeah.
any others?
No, I would say
All
we'll
right,
let
let's move
people
on.
keep thinking on that. Yeah.
Cool. So, ultimately, any story that you tell, something happens. It's a story of change. And stories of change have a pattern that they follow. And some of you may have heard over the years about the hero's journey, um, which is a pattern that underlies all the most successful stories of change. We've taken excerpts of it and boiled it down into 9 key areas. We've just talked about the everyday hero, the compelling villain, and the better world, but I'm going to show you some of the other boxes to give you a sense of what they are. And then what we're going to do is jump into one of the core tools that we use at Stronger Stories, which is called the Lean Story Canvas. So we already talked about a little bit about Luke Skywalker and his ordinary world. He's dreaming of being a Jedi. And this ordinary world that he lives in, it has some tension and problems in it that are prompting him to want to change. The compelling villain in this story is Darth Vader, but it is also a lack of hope. He has several calls to go on this adventure, this journey of change. We've got the classic sort of Princess Leia hologram, but there's several others in the movie as well. And then he literally crosses the threshold, which is the point of no return, when he leaves his home planet on a spaceship. He's got people who help him succeed along the way. And fundamentally, this entire movie could be boiled up. And I hope no one is going to be upset about a spoiler because this one is so old, but by 3 core challenges, which is get onto the Death Star, get the princess off of the Death Star, blow up the Death Star. And then at the end, the world is better, not because Darth Vader is defeated, but because Luke has found hope and the world has changed as a result of his journey. And what a lot of people forget is that this first Star Wars film is called A New Hope, which is what it's all about. So we can see that pattern in not only Star Wars, but all 37 Marvel movies. Disney has used it to great effect. Brands use it. This is an example of Patagonia. Social movements, you might recognize Greta Thunberg from the climate strikes. Um, and that is all summed up by our tool here, which is just to recap, your everyday hero is someone who's relatable, their ordinary world, something that's frustrating about where they currently are, a problem, which is the compelling villain, a trigger, call to adventure, reason to change, the first step, your point of no return, who helps you along the way, what are 3 hurdles and increasing difficulty that you cross, and then how is the world better? What's the impact that you've made as a result of that journey of change? So the reason this matters for your job search, just to close up this chapter, is that people are irrationally emotional. So remember that your story can change the way that they see you, and it can change the decision that they make. You control your story. And so when you're building it, think about empathy, think about grabbing attention, and think about painting the picture of a better world as you being part of your target employer's new team. Okay, so that's the first chapter. Any questions, thoughts, any more favorite heroes that anybody wants to share in the chat?
Got a few here, some really good ones. Lady Gaga, uh,
Great.
Dolly Parton, also love. And then one of my favorites, personally, The Little Prince, and talking about his commitment to love and responsibility in the journey of self-discovery and enlightenment. Yes, excellent one.
Love that. Oh, that reminds me, I've got that book sitting on my daughter's bookshelf. We need to read it. That's a great one. Okay, so now we're going to talk about origin stories. And we're going to do this a little bit, partially because I think it's helpful to get it out of our system, is that we all want to tell the story of us. And when you're looking for a job, it can be hard sometimes to figure out which bits of your story to tell. So the first part, what we're going to do is just put it all down on a piece of paper and start thinking about our story from the very beginning and kind of how we ended up in the career that we're in or in this specific job search. Then I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer, and she's going to show how you switch it. So you might not use all the elements here, and I would say that you definitely probably don't when you're introducing yourself to a new employer, but it is helpful at least to get it all down so that you can make some decisions about which pieces of your origin story you want to tell. And that might be different depending on who you're talking to, and it probably should be. So, hopefully can you all click on this link? I'm hoping that will work. Oh, wait, that is not the link I wanted it to be. Um, I'm going to give you a different link in just a second, but instead, um, I'll just show you this. Can you see my screen still?
No, we can't. But when you
Okay, I'll
do,
go back to it.
I'll get that link and we'll pop it into the
Yeah, and
chat.
it's in I think I've got it at the end of the presentation too. But it's essentially just a blank Google slide version of this,
Mhm.
which is the Lean Story Canvas. And the way that this tool was developed is that, like I said, we've worked with a lot of early stage entrepreneurs, and many of them have been engineers in clean energy. And so, what my colleagues did is they merged the elements of the hero's journey with a tool called the Lean Business Canvas, which is a plan on a page. And why this is kind of helpful versus the sequential boxes that I was sharing earlier is that it allows you to sort of mix up the building blocks and not think of it linearly. And it gives you a little bit more space for areas that you might want to develop further, like your three challenges, your compelling villain, which is always one of the hardest ones to really nail down, and you as a hero.
We've got one question. Is this a business model canvas with a twist?
It is. It is. And it can be used. So we use it a lot with our clients to explain a complicated idea or business or proposition or product. So it can be used in many different ways. But that's also why it's great for job hunting because often the hardest thing to do is tell the story of yourself, and it can feel like the most complicated story to try to get down. So hopefully these boxes will help. And you'll get this, as I said again afterwards, but I've put some prompts in here that are specifically for job hunters using this canvas. You'll see also on our website, we've got all of this stuff up for free, and we have a free story school that you can go through if you're interested in a bit more of this methodology. But there are other versions if you're trying to sell your business or a new product or a new idea or innovation with different questions in.
To at least get us by at this point, I've put a PDF of this in the chat.
Thank you, Larry. I
And
appreciate it.
it could possibly be the correct version.
I,
So
I think it probably is. The version that I shared before is actually a from a pro bono project that we did. So, that's all, it's all open, but it's probably not going to be as relevant because it was for refugees from Palestine. So to make this real, we have a real live volunteer. So I'm going to say hello to Allison.
Hello.
Hello. So Allison spent some time with us thinking about her story and how it maps to this canvas. So we thought this might be an easier way to sort of bring it to life. Um, so if these builds work, yeah, yay, they do. Okay, so Allison, let's start with you as our everyday hero. So I'm going to put in our kind of prompts, but I think you probably will elaborate on it as well. Tell us about yourself, your background, and why we can relate to you.
I hope I'm relatable. We'll
I think
see.
to, I think to this group, absolutely.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm a graphic designer, and like most graphic designers, I love order. Um, I also grew up in the Midwest where many of us value things like not complaining, getting a lot of stuff done in a very little amount of time, being very accountable, performing well under pressure, and yeah, I like winning. I mean, Iowa has the best state fair, so it makes sense. We always win.
Great.
Um, yeah.
And when we were talking, Allison mentioned that she like won at Parcheesi once in the state fair. And that was one of the things I remembered. So I stuck it in the canvas, but I don't know if she wanted me to or not.
It's
Um,
fun.
but it is the point about, what makes you you, what makes you different, what makes you stand out, what makes you relatable. Um, and so your ordinary world, Allison, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. When we were talking about this, I was trying to think of like any conflict or anything that might have happened when I was a kid, but really, I think like what drew me into the design world was that my dad was a newspaper publisher. Um, I grew up spending a ton of time at the press and like being introduced to like different grid systems, typography, just the smell of ink was really nice. And then my mom was sick when I was young and into like my teenage years. And I think when you have a parent going through something like that, you're just super drawn to order. And
Yeah.
that fits really well with design. You just want to make sense of everything. Um, and I've always liked crafting. I think that kind of came from my dad being a newspaper publisher. I mean, we were always sitting in the the office making things. And yeah, I wanted to find something that kind of merged those two elements, order, creativity.
Great. And then your call to adventure brought you to graphic design.
Yeah, so that's the crafting thing. I always wanted to have the best project in high school. So I would do a lot of really detailed projects. And my high school German teacher was like, "You should do graphic design. I love this brochure you made." And I was like, "Oh, I should do that." And I did.
You did. And then you're crossing the threshold, your point of no return. Do you want to talk about that and
Yeah.
in school?
The program that I went to was really competitive, and you spent the first year building your portfolio. So I guess this is where the winning comes in, is I really wanted a spot in that graphic design program, but hadn't really like thought about it much beyond that. And once I got in, I was like, I was kind of struggling with learning the programs. They didn't really teach that. It was all concepting skills, which I'm thankful for now. But it was kind of making me feel like, did I make the right choice?
Yeah.
Um, and then we had a design project where the instructor just drew names out of a hat, and we were supposed to make like some editorial piece on this famous designer. Um, and mine was Alvin Lustig, and I hated his designs at first because I love order and minimalism and la la la. And his stuff, upon first glance, appears to be like not structured at all. Um, but I think like as I spent more time researching him, I discovered that there is this like very rigid grid system behind his seemingly chaotic designs. And that made me feel like, I don't know, really inspired.
Yeah. Um, and then so compelling villain, I put this one in pink because this is the one we sort of are playing with a bit. And in my experience, it's always the hardest one to really nail down, and it might be a little bit of something that you think to and come back to. Um, And actually, Allison did exactly that after our chat. She dropped me a note and said, maybe it's like style over substance. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Allison?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I was trying to think of something where like all of my favorite things, like order
Yeah,
comes into play. With design, yeah, I really struggled with the whole villain thing. And I thought maybe for me, it's like I really value clarity, organization, consistency in design. And I think, I mean, as designers, we're all supposed to have impact at the end.
yeah,
But if one of those things is off, everything fails, kind of. So to me, it feels like design is much more than just something pretty.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's great. And like we said, three challenges is the biggest part of the story. And especially when you're further on in your career, like Allison is, I think this is where the temptation to want to tell a potential employer every single job or experience that you've had, it can end up taking a long time. And I can say, being on the other end of dozens of interviews, hiring creatives for teams that I've worked for before, um, don't do that. Try to get it into buckets and think about what you've learned from these phases. And that's where the power of three can really help. And we've got our magic number three challenges here. Um, so as Allison was sort of talking me through her journey, we sort of chunked it into three phases. Allison, do you want to run through that real quick? I think we still have a couple more minutes on this, so we're doing fine on time.
Yeah, I was at a job for 10 years, and that's a really long time. So when I was there, I was, learning design for brand campaigns. I was at an agency, but kind of like functioning as an in-house designer. Um, and I got really good at concepting and doing like fine detail work in design. And after 10 years, I decided to leave the comfort and safety of what I'd known and take another role, also doing brand campaigns. So that was similar, but I feel like it was really stretched me to learn new processes and everything.
Yeah.
But, if anybody's from Seattle, Zulily closed. So my job ended. And I thought, oh, well, let's try something new. Maybe you don't want to do brand campaigns. And that turned out to be a big flop. I did not like it. I was doing like sales enablement stuff. It's not my jam. But it did give me the realization that I don't want to work at an agency. I prefer in-house environments and that I actually do really love doing brand campaigns and I would love to do that again.
Um, and then mentors and gifts, I'm just going to add up real quick. But what those do is they essentially make us believe that your journey is possible, and that you're equipped to succeed at that journey. Um, and if you want to say anything about those, Allison, you completely can, but I kind of want to show everyone your better world since
Yeah.
you teed it up so well. So this is where you're going to land, and hopefully it will be at your target employer. And so you're painting the picture for them of you and their team, and how that made your world better and their world better. So do you want to talk a little bit here? Because you also had some more thoughts about this one after we initially talked, didn't you, Allison?
Yeah, no, I don't even remember what I said, but um,
I think it was the team stuff that I stuck there in pink.
oh,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really um like the part that I love most about design and what I would like to get back to is like thinking really holistically about campaigns in particular. Like I love how um you have the ability to go from like concept to then executing. So I get a little bit of the like using my brain and then also getting really technical. And I can make everything look consistent and clear, and you kind of have some control over how things end up. And I did also add that, like, I think something that I didn't put in here was, oh, you did add it. Yeah, that I really want to be on a team that's engaged, collaborative, and supportive. Something that I've gotten to do before that I really enjoy is like help remote teams be more collaborative with each other. And I have seen that that can help design be more consistent and ordered and, just a better brand in general. So yeah, doing something with all of that.
Amazing. Let's give Allison a virtual round of applause. That was amazing. Really appreciate you opening up and sharing your story with everyone. And hopefully it's useful to see how you can sort of populate these boxes. And one of the things we often say at Stronger Stories is that story is a very living, messy thing. So this gives you a way that you can sort of scratch it out, cross out boxes, rewrite it, and you'll probably find that it evolves a bit over time and depending on who you're talking to.
I was going to jump in really quick, Mickey, with a
Yes,
couple
please.
there were just two questions, and this will ring familiar because it was one of the things when I was thinking about this, about the villain.
Yeah.
And there was just basically, the first question was, is this kind of your problem statement? But it's an interesting experiment to go through with yourself, right? So it's kind of when you think about all of these different things, and I think Allison did it really, really well here, is thinking about sort of what are those things, and it's maybe a problem, but maybe it's the kind of thing that you're always kind of catches you. So Larry mentioned, could this be the really competitive and saturated job market? And I would say, sure, that could be part of it, but I would urge folks, if that's sort of like, that's making it kind of very external, you could have that's a pretty compelling villain, but I would also add some ones that feel like, what are those sort of internal pieces that keep coming up for your story? The current job market is certainly a current one, but for you, I would add a few more if that's one of them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And often entrepreneurs run into this with their sort of origin stories that they're pitching to investors. Um, and what doesn't work is if you go too deep into your own personal life. Like, don't talk about a bad relationship with your mom. Don't talk about, it's not that. It's kind of like a professional villain or something in the world that everybody can relate to. So something that is a truism or a behavior or an idea. That's, I think, why Allison's sort of style over substance is a good one because it's something that we automatically kind of connect with. But I would also say for origin stories for job hunters, if you don't have a really tight villain, it's okay because you're going to want to uh, tailor it to the specific job and organization that you're looking at anyway. And Jennifer will get a little bit into that in the next kind of iteration of this canvas. Um, so hopefully that
Yeah,
helps.
and Marissa just mentioned it could be something like being made nuts by all the bad design around us.
Yes,
I love
exactly.
that idea. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Versus if we were doing a Marvel movie, it might be a bad relationship with your mom.
Yeah.
That's the difference. So just to wrap up this section real quick, because I want to get into the next one, which is probably more important. Um, so the Lean Story Canvas, it's a tool that you can use, and it's a shortcut to make a memorable story. You don't need to include every job or experience. This is a way of sort of giving a high-level version of the journey that you've been on and how it's made you a great fit for the role that you are looking for. And I also have a link in here to a longer form blog on our website about origin stories that explains a little bit more about them and how to use them in case you're curious. So I'm going to hand over to Jennifer, and I'm going to attempt to also, oh good, I can now see the chat. So while you're presenting, Jennifer, I can keep an eye on the chat.
Oh, great.
And just let me know when you want me to change?
Yeah, sure. I also wanted to say about what's so cool about that framework, because I know personally, having been in sort of this world for so long, I hadn't seen it laid out with those really great questions. And remember, it's sort of a way of just putting pieces together, mostly for yourself, right? So I know sometimes, especially folks who like Allison, who like order, like, so am I going to put this all together and exactly into something? It's like, maybe, but really what it's doing is helping you think more deeply about who you are, what, where you've been, where you want to go, what kind of company, what your expertise is, where maybe you want it to be, and some of those things. So it's kind of a framework and like a container for you to think about you. And then there's all sorts of ways you can use it, as Mickey said. But I know sometimes it's like, I've been through a lot of exercises where then you really just do put that all together and then drop that in somewhere. And I don't, that's not the idea here, is to get you really to think about that really compelling, unique story that's going to help someone. Oh my gosh, I really see Allison now because I understand all these things that are much more than data points and the other things. So I just wanted to point that out, because it's just a really, really excellent way of digging in and finding out, because everybody wants to seem interesting and unique, but this is a really great tool to figure out, well, how do I find out what that is? So I really encourage you to spend some time with it, because I have, and it's just sort of a really fun experience, if nothing else, just to learn some things about yourself, and then hopefully you can use it. Okay. So we are going to dive into talking about your audience. So when we talk about sort of audience within storytelling, and in my background in media, it's, in this case, it would be wherever it is that you're imagining you would want to work, whoever you're talking to with your materials, your cover letter, your resume, your story. So there's a lot of different ways of thinking about audience. So when we talk about audience here, we're talking about whoever it is that's going to be on the receiving end of your story. So one huge thing about doing anything job related, of course, to say nothing of how much people are motivated and understand each other, is really trying to understand your audience's story. What are they telling themselves? What do we know about them? And how can we incorporate that into how we're presenting ourselves to them? So there's some cheats that are kind of fun to go about doing this, but there's the next slide is kind of another good way of, are you advancing these, Mickey, for me?
There you go.
Okay. So we just love this idea of sort of what we know. And so when you think about this from your audience's perspective, I mean, you know yourself really well, but then there's also, when you think about your audience, there's all of these different things that we see on the surface, right? We can see what they're telling the outside world and trends and events and their stories. And we kind of know, if we're want to go work at Starbucks, we have a sense of what they're putting out into the world. But underneath there's a lot of who they are, what it's like to work there, what their identity is, what they believe, what they value. And it's a really interesting exercise to try and go to that deeper level, right? Because we know, and that's, again, these are all in service of helping you stand out and helping whoever it is you're trying to reach see you. So if you're trying to look into their world a little bit deeper, then it's going to make it much, much easier. Yes, next slide. So this is a really fun exercise. There's a lot on this screen. This comes from some values work by Shalom Schwartz. I don't know if any of you've ever seen it. I've seen it in a different context, but it's basically the same. It shows sort of different categories of different universal values. And he believed that everybody basically had, this was, deep research, long held over decades, has sort of these core values and beliefs. What is so fun about looking at this for yourself is to dig in and think, oh, well, I know who I am. When I used this framework when working in entertainment, it was sort of like kind of the things people watch, and you could put yourself into a specific category. And I might say, oh, well, these are all the values that are definitely represent me. And I kind of, do this or watch that. But what you notice when you look around the values circle is there are more things, more often than not, people kind of largely identify in one quadrant, but you can pick out other values around here. So you can see maybe if you know, a lot of us may either fall into this right-hand side or partially in the left, but then you start to go over in the middle and you think, well, yeah, but I'm interested in, you know, healthy. I think I'm intelligent. I'm also ambitious. That's totally on the other side of social justice and all of that. And so the point of looking at this is people do tend to fall into certain categories. And if you spend any time with this kind of work, you'll be like, oh yeah, I think I kind of know people that fall into these different categories. But what the exercise here is to notice that you have values kind of scattered around. And it was one of the things that gave me a lot of hope, and also made a lot of sense in how can we connect with people we don't necessarily know, we don't know a lot about. But for me, when we're thinking about story sort of in the world where people may think completely differently than we do, or watch different things, or live in different places, when you look at the universal values, it's more likely than not that there are going to be things shared among people. So what you really want to do, if you can spend some time with this, is just think about where you fall and start to pick out and just notice the things that you value that might be far apart from each other on the framework. And that just will help you. It helps me be, you know, to think you're all one person, not necessarily. And it helps you just kind of broaden out also the things that you really value. And this will become more helpful in your job search once you start to apply this outwardly. So I think as we look at this, so yeah, so one of the things when you're thinking about somebody externally, in this case, a company, a person, you're really also trying to look for those external values that happen, that you can notice within a company. What is their culture like? What can I learn about what people are saying it is to work there? You're trying to identify if people, if those companies or people are a good fit for you by exploring who they are. There could be, there's really interesting potential roadblocks while you're kind of going through an interview process. And it can kind of help you think through the story that might come up that you can tell when you're there. So when you think about trying to assess, I'm trying to make sure I'm getting caught up to this part. So when you go to this next slide, how the good way to start this, because it's a really kind of complicated thing when you're not used to doing this, but it's to start with what are those 3 to 5 values that matter most to you. And then you want to take, and it's going to be different based on whoever you're applying to or whatever company is, and say, what do I think theirs are? And I know the very first thought is like, how in the world would I know that? But luckily, you are all living in a time of information. And we did this previously on a chat with Larry and Mickey. AI can do a lot of this work for you and say, here's what I want to know. I want to know about any, you know, you can certainly find some of this on things like Glassdoor has a lot of information, but just have AI even do a search of, I'm looking for ideas around their values, their culture. What are things people are saying? What are articles written about them? And I, of course, having worked in journalism, always ask for attribution so that we know they're not making it up. But just see if you can mine deeper. This was harder before, kind of word of mouth. There are some things, but it's not hard now. You can actually dig deeper on what those things are. And then that's where you start to say, oh, okay, seems like maybe I have a lot of values here. This other company seems like it's a little skewing a little bit this way. Most likely you will be surprised, in my experience, by what's more similar than by what's different. Because I think you can imagine, oh, well, I would never go work for that company. And those may be hard red lines. I know I have a few, but it's sort of those ones in the middle where I know for me, I've spent my life in pretty much apart from my 20s doing nonprofit work. And I've thought sort of later on, well, would I ever want to go back into for-profit work, or thinking about doing something completely different? And this is a really good exercise for that, because it is kind of a different culture. It's a different mindset. So from there, any questions, anything popping up, Mickey, we want to?
Oh, Larry's put in a link to Glassdoor. in the chat. And I think also there's a link there to the human values survey. So if you want to see, it gives you some prompts. It doesn't take too long to do. And we've got people adding a few to the chat. So Angie Whitney said transparency, integrity, environmental sustainability, and inclusion, which is great. And if we go back, I'm going to just go back here so we kind of see where those are. So that's very much up here. And I think what's also kind of helpful to think about with this is your hero box and that building empathy and how you might tailor your story to your potential employers. If they're, like Jennifer said, a for-profit versus nonprofit, you might have a value of, say, I don't know, wealth or social recognition that you see in a for-profit, and maybe the nonprofit would be more over here. So you might dial up that different value depending on what kind of organization you're targeting.
And I kind of want to throw in here, it's slightly different, but just my own pro tip, having done this myself, and it's sort of different. And I didn't get it from kind of I did this before I looked at that sort of values framework, but I figured out, I just sat one day and thought, what would I say are my, I mean, these are typically for me, laying out my professional values. What do I think when you have Jennifer on board? What am I bringing from a values perspective? And I identified 4 that were for me. Like, I think this is, me, like I'm these 4 things. Then again, and this is sort of something I've done. I love talking to creative people, by the way, because sometimes it's harder to imagine putting it out. I figured out a creative way to show how I think, and again, this is sort of what we're doing here, those values would show up in their organization, and what would they look like? And I mean, you have to get it into a tight 2 sentences, but one of mine is candor. And I would say this is what candor might look like showing up in your organization. And I also put pictures. I mean, I do completely wackadoo things that, and again, I would highly encourage, and we're going to look at an example here in a second, but if all of you are creative, I hope you're using every single bit of that, because it is going to help you stand out. If you think there is a typical way to do anything, unless you're trying to get through the SEO bots, which is a real thing. And so they've kind of argued against some of those things. And maybe Larry, you'd have some advice, but just do the creative thing that makes you unique, especially in the fields you're in, because it's that thing that makes you stand out and that makes you feel like you've really, really shown the true you. Let's see. So, yeah, so now we're just going to talk about, if you could imagine, but are we going to your part now, Mickey? Are you doing this, or this is?
So this is your bit still. It's
right.
Employers Canvas.
The chapter 4, right. Yep. So again, this is a really, really great statement. I have had a slightly way, but I love the way Stronger Stories talks about this. And the most important story that your audience, so this is your employer, is already telling themselves, and you can give them a better story. So to understand what that story is, that's the most important one, is to understand they have a story already. So you're trying to give them what is a better story that they're going to be able to tell themselves with you as their new employee. So one of the things too, and this is just a sort of a side comment about all of the dozens and dozens of resumes and cover letters I've seen, is if I could just put in a little extra thing of just reminding everybody that you're trying to show always why you, and the uniqueness that is you and the story that is you, is going to help solve their problems and make them be able to tell a better story. And sometimes we get so excited, we've now figured out our story, we're all creative, and we're just kind of talking about ourselves, and we forget to explain to folks how that fits into their story. And one of the some great advice I got when I was a lot younger was, don't make people work to figure out how you fit into their company. Make it so easy. Make it so that it just falls out of, off the screen into the page. If they go, oh my gosh, I know exactly how Mickey's going to fit in here. I don't have to even think about it. I can see it right here. So when you know that's happened, then you've figured out how to give them a better story. So
That's also the wrong link. Sorry, my fault. So I
okay,
will.
so we'll get
but
a
it's the same
different
one.
link.
Yeah.
We'll get a different link. And then if you want to go ahead and we'll just kind of look. So what you want to do is think about now. This is a really helpful one. It's going to be a helpful one, not just in kind of how you might write up either your cover letter or design specific parts of your resume, but really helpful if you get to that interview phase, right? Because you're really going to have given some very creative thought to their journey through this. And there's some tips here of how you could go through just what we did for you, but do that for your employer. And again, this is just meant to be a framework. There might be some of these that you go, I'm not sure, I don't really know. It's supposed to just kind of help walk through some of these idea of, oh, okay, so I can see why do I imagine this organization? Why are they the everyday hero? And again, this is all filtered through your lens, which is cool because you're showing them this is how you see them. This is how you imagine a better world. And remember, the better world always has you in it. And so thinking about what do they, they're always going to want to hear from you. Well, what would you think they would need to do differently? What is the call to adventure? What is crossing the threshold? And there's something that, again, I would say in one of these traps. So it is the villain, again, is be careful because they do want, any employer wants to know that you understand, but we're always reframing in the idea of this is how I see what this is, the villain, the problem. And here's how we're going to get to a better world. Here's the crossing the threshold. Here's the opportunities. Here's what that call to adventure is. But you have to know what it is for your audience, which is your employer, before you do that. And so this will be different for everyone and every organization and every company you apply for. But this doesn't have to be a big, long, laborious thing. It's meant to be, have I thought about all of these pieces? Do I know what is that optimistic part of the story? Where is that resolution? Where do we think those challenges are so I can address them in a really creative way? And especially I do love even talking about it through this framework is really cool because I can guarantee you people won't have heard this because it's so innovative. It might not work for every company, but just kind of talking about it in some of these terms of that we can conquer it together, as Mickey did earlier, of using another example. I've actually used a Star Wars example and to prove my point before. By the way, I did not know Luke was a teenager. Thank you for that tip. That's what I'm taking away from today's presentation. I was just like, Luke was a teenager. So
or young adult.
Right. I always thought, because I was so young when I first saw it, I was like, my gosh, that's true. But you can, turn anything into whatever your level of creativity is, whatever is going to feel right to you, that is a representation of who you really are. So the next one. So then.
Sorry that.
Oh, that's okay. So then we're talking about different pieces. You might then take different pieces of what you just worked on that canvas and have some elevator pitches, right? There's some different patterns here of what you do and why, how you make things better, who you help, the problem they have and how you're going to solve it. And then the immediate problem. And again, really key there, the inspiration for solving it. And how the world looks when it's defeated. So remember, all story arcs, as Mickey talked about, it's sort of that rise, and then there is some sort of a resolution. We always want to leave any story with, not that everything's always tied up in a bow, but that there's hope, especially in a job application process, that you are uniquely qualified to help them conquer their own villains and transcend some of those big negative parts of the story. So this, I really love this next part. I call this the familiar surprise part, but what this means is It's a really important part in so many different things. I think this applies to a lot of different parts of life, but when talking about a story, the best ones, you think about when you hear a story, the ones that you lean into are the ones that you, oh, this kind of makes sense to me. I know what you're talking about, but it's also challenging me. Oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. The way to quickly turn somebody off is when you're kind of either telling them everything they already know. So if you, or your job or any kind of application or cover letters, everything they already know, then that's not helping your story, or you're completely going off into another, like you've got all these amazing ideas and it's too far off, it's too challenging, it's too left field. So the sweet spot is really finding where is that zone where you're both finding something, yep, they're going to understand this, they can see that I know, but I'm also bringing in inspirational new things and maybe challenging the way they think about something. So you have to really work on that. That's sort of a long-term thing to always keep in mind, because it's really easy to want to be like, well, I'm going to blow their doors off, I'm going to tell them all the stuff they don't know. And that's not exactly the right approach either. So I've been there, I've done it. Okay, so I love this. Larry gave us this example just to give you something a little closer to home for all of you. Rebecca here, I'm not sure if this is somebody from a long time ago or somebody anybody would know, but was putting together sort of her portfolio and getting sort of her story together. And it's a good story, right? It's you know, sort of kind of going through, and here's who I am, and here's what I believed. But Larry challenged her to kind of how could we do this differently? How can we challenge sort of that traditional, and you know, without even knowing this framework of saying what would make this more you? Because a lot of people might say this, and so so this particular one has some of these elements, right? But if you go to the next one, she changed it to be much more about a compelling story that will help people understand, oh, Rebecca's the one that had this, rather than trying to remember she had these unique things about her. She had this idea that stood out, and just changed the way, kind of thought about herself in a way of what makes me unique, what makes me interesting. And there's 3 things represented here as well. So it's just kind of, again, using all of these tools to go through and say, have I thought carefully, not only about what makes me unique, but what's unique, and what are those challenges? What are those stories that the people I'm applying to are telling themselves? What do they value? What are they thinking? And again, sort of, and then how do you put that together? Those are just pieces to get you thinking about, oh, okay, now I know what I really want to say and how we all fit together that I hadn't thought of before.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about what Rebecca did here is that she used both her origin story and her target client story on her website, but in different places. And it kind of shows you how it can work. And she moved herself here as to the mentor in the story instead of the hero. So that's when you're doing these 2 different canvases, what you're kind of thinking about is, how am I the mentor? And it's the most common piece of advice that we give to our clients as well, is that it's so natural to just put our own selves as the hero of our own story. But what's way more compelling for an audience and a potential employer is that they're the hero of the story and you're helping them reach their better world.
Yes.
Also, I just love this. It's such a great example. I think we're going to steal it, Larry, for future. I hope Rebecca's okay with that.
Yes. So, oh yeah, so we're just, yeah, so the idea of, basically we kind of went through this a little bit before, but the idea of, you know, as Mickey just said, making them the hero and making that distinctive. This also, again, makes it easier to identify gaps in your own understanding and to ask more questions. It's just sometimes some of these things really open you up to knowing yourself better. And I don't know if any of you have gone through this, but sometimes you go all the way through and then you think about, or even apply, or maybe you've even gotten into companies where you interview and then you think, oh, yeah, now I maybe you got the job, maybe you didn't, but you learned a lot about you and what your value is, and then how you might have answered that differently. And this just gives you a lot of advanced work. So yeah, you talked about being the mentor and all of that. So any questions about that at all that came up, Mickey?
Um, no, but if anyone wants to add one, they certainly can. And we'll try to keep a little bit of time at the end for questions.
Great.
Well, so this is the last little bit. So I know we've thrown a lot at you. I want to share a little bit about different story types as part of a shortcut to simplify the plot. So really reinforcing the point that Jennifer made is make it easy for them to understand and remember your story. And we would call this next section sort of storytelling black belt. So don't feel like you need to apply it immediately, but once you start to get comfortable with the patterns, if you want to go a little bit further, this is what you can use. So 7 story types. It was a book by Christopher Brooker based on, again, some research about the commonalities between the different stories we tell. And how those different stories can be structured. So I've got some examples here for each one, um, and also how that can be helpful for your career story. So, for example, rags to riches. That's someone who goes on a journey of success and wealth and fame, realizes that isn't all that they thought it would be cracked up to be, and then finds a real better world that has something moral about it. So if you think about like Slumdog Millionaire or Aladdin, those would be classic sort of rags to riches story. So this would be a good story to tell if you were a banker and you became a florist, for example, or um, even sort of what Allison was saying about, I tried product marketing, but I realized that really that wasn't quite right. Um, Voyage and return, that's where you go away and come back. That's a really good one for transferable skills. Overcoming the monster, that's where you've got like the underdog, and that's a real classic one. We love to see an underdog win. It's just sort of natural, and it's one of the really old stories that as humans that we will always be rooting for. Um, a rebirth story, starting over. It's great for your career changer or if you've taken a break for family reasons, returning to work. And quest stories are awesome if you really believe in a shared mission because they're really about a collaborative group of heroes. What I would say you probably want to usually want to avoid for a job process would be a comedy, and you'd always want to avoid a tragedy. So I've included some links at the end, but I thought I'd ask everyone quickly. I already kind of gave you one away, but if you think about Allison's story, which types could she use? And she could use more than one, depending on her audience and what she thinks might resonate the most with them for their values. So you can pop it in the chat if you want to play the pop quiz. But I am conscious of time, and we have 5 minutes left. So that's just sort of wrapping up the archetype section. Yeah, so the hero's journey will follow those different patterns as well. They're just different ways that you can tell the story. So even if you think about one of the most common questions that we get is Romeo and Juliet, and how does that follow the hero's journey? I mean, the only thing that's a little different is the better world, but the world has changed as a result of their love, but all the other elements you can still definitely plot into those boxes. Okay, so now we're going to stop. We're going to take some more questions. We have 5 minutes left. And so over
Actually,
to you all.
you have 20 minutes left. If we have the questions, we can
Do
go
we? I
till
thought
10.
we were 75 minutes.
Well, we're being generous tonight.
Okay, great. Awesome.
We
Yeah,
have
so
free time to give away.
awesome.
And we have a question from Bobby Hughes. And he asks, how does the hero's journey fit within this 7-story framework?
Yeah. Oh, I sort of answered that without pointing out that it was that it was a question. Sorry about that,
Can I ask,
Bobby.
can I
Yeah.
ask more about that?
Yeah, go
Because
ahead.
I'm just trying to reconcile, like, the hero's journey is not a story type. Is that in
Yeah,
the story
it's
types or what?
the hero's journey is elements that are found in all the most enduring stories. So the concept, I mean, there's been research that also calls it the Virgin's Promise, but the most famous is Joseph Campbell, who basically got an army of grad students to go and analyze hundreds and hundreds of different types of stories from Victorian penny dreadfuls to Aboriginal myths to more modern sort of TV shows and movies. And this was back in the 50s and 60s. And he thought they'd find like a half a dozen patterns. And what they basically did is they realized that all the most enduring stories had the same building blocks. I think in Campbell's framework, it was more like 14 or 15, but we've just really simplified it down to 9. Or you can even use 3 for like our very, very simple story. And then this kind of shows you different ways that you can tell the story using the different building blocks. And it's also about kind of the order that you introduce things in and the emotional levers that you pull. But these are shortcuts that we recognize for types of stories versus the elements of a core story, if that makes sense.
So, so somebody might go on a hero's journey and go from rags to riches, or they might go on a hero's journey and it would also be a story about overcoming a monster,
Yeah,
or like you're basically saying like the hero's journey is like in pretty much every story. Is that,
yes.
got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
story of change.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the movie examples kind of help there too.
Yeah.
So I put that back up.
Thank you.
Related question from Mignon. Do you have any tips for translating the hero's journey into a concise, impactful elevator pitch or cover letter?
Yes, we do. I'm going to go back to the elevator pitch. So these little icons, they relate to different parts of the Lean Story canvas. So like the little heart, for example, that's the hero. The 2 hearts is the mentor. And this example shows different ways that you can use your Canvas elements to turn it into an elevator pitch. We also have on our website how you can translate it into a sales sequence, how you could translate it into an investor pitch, how you can translate it into a website by just moving those different blocks around. So that's where it gets, once you kind of get your story down, you can then translate it to your LinkedIn page and your resume, but it's also something that you've got in your mind. So when you're at a networking event, you can say it. And it's easy to remember. Oh, so does that, hopefully that answers your question, and we'll provide some links at the end too, where you can go explore more. And we have our free story school available online too, which is several units of online learning that we've created and that we've put out there into the world as part of our mission as a B Corp. Cool. All right. So it looks like someone's asked if we're going to do the presentation another time. Um, we don't have it scheduled to, but if you want to drop me a note, I can let you know if we do something similar. And I think the recording is also going to be available afterwards, Larry. So maybe we could share that with your coworker.
Absolutely.
Great. Any other questions?
I have a question,
Great.
but
Go.
it's for the audience. It's for those of you who have come here tonight. I'm assuming, based on the title of this talk, the majority of you are in job hunting mode. And if you are, could you either just come on camera or pop into the chat kind of what's pain point number 1? What's the most frustrating thing about that search for you so far? And if nothing else, we're going to give you a big hug.
Someone said AI. Yeah.
Being noticed among the masses. Oh yeah.
So can somebody who would be willing to say what about AI and the job hunting process is, because I could take that a couple of different ways. Can you expand on that a little bit? Is anyone brave enough?
It was both Bobby and Marissa who said AI.
I'm I'm finding problems with AI too. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm finding problems with AI too. Just simply uh, job requirements asking for AI experience. How do you get that AI experience? Other than, you know, I've messed around with it, I've experimented with it, but I have no formal training in it. And so it's tricky when job recs ask for it, and it's like, okay, sure. How can we do that?
I have a couple of thoughts about that. I mean, I don't know if that's everybody else's. So what's interesting to me about that, Eric, is I know everyone would love to hire really experienced people in AI, and they really don't exist yet. So I think the difference, I mean, I think there's going to be a whole bunch of people who are kind of probably like you, who've dabbled and know, and then there's going to be a thin layer of experts, and over time that's going to change. So what I would see in that, and again, you know, a lot of people are asking for their sort of unicorn ideal, is if that seems like there is a consistent ask among employers, and that seems like a valid one, is being able to show that you are not only competent in understanding and you use them, but that you are, you know, sort of your history, part of your story is how quickly you adapt, or how you are able to learn and adapt to things quickly, and that you're curious and interested if you are. I mean, some people can't stand it, but I think in this field that's going to be tough. But I think you will be, just based on a lot of discussions I've had, in good company when you're emerging into an emerging field that's rapidly changing, is showing that not only do you know, but you are rapidly learning, and that you could apply it tomorrow, and that your history, the story is of you are, you know, quick at adaptation and learning and curiosity. And I would be shocked if there's all of these people who are experts. So I wouldn't worry as much about that, but definitely lean into, hey, I'm here, I'm right in it, I'm in the thick of it. I use it, I got it. I don't know who these, I just, again, this is a side thing of mine about AI,
Sure.
and it is a desperate need that doesn't exist yet, is experts.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Eric,
Yes, sir.
put in the chat a link to some of the LinkedIn Learning courses on AI, which after you take them, you get a little badge you can put on your LinkedIn profile. And I think right now, and you know, here comes the lightning to strike me dead. That's about all it takes. Like you can strut around like, oh yeah, I know my way around AI, and you're probably not going to be challenged on it unless they have some hyper specific need. So yes, you can sprinkle a little AI magic dust on your profile and probably be off to the races.
Perfect.
The
Thank
other,
you.
just quickly on AI, the other thing I just want to throw in there is that Jennifer and I have had a lot of fun playing with AI in the Canvas. So it's one of the things, like if you're kind of stuck on what is my story, you can tell your favorite AI bot, these are the elements of the canvas. Here are my answers. What would you say my journey should look like? Similarly, you can toss in a website. I do this all the time for potential clients and say, tell me their story as a hero's journey and see what it says. It won't be perfect, but it is a helpful starting point and a bit of a shortcut that you can use. And as Jennifer said, you can also use it to try to get an idea of their values, because AI knows all about the shorts values matrix, and it'll be able to tell you what it's finding on a potential employer's website or LinkedIn profile that maps to those values. Larry, it looks like someone also said imposter syndrome. while working on a portfolio. Excuse me. It's a vicious cycle. It's hard not to compare my work to other designers' work. Is imposter syndrome a villain?
I love this because if you haven't had imposter syndrome, then you have not lived, is my experience. So I hope just to normalize that the only idea that I've heard about this that feels helpful is it's a sense of there's somebody mentioned something about turning imposter syndrome on its head, and it's the idea that you're always searching for the next thing. So you're always in slightly an area where you're continually learning. And if you're continually learning and reaching and growing, and a new job is that, and all of those things, it just, our brain likes to tell a different story of like, maybe you don't belong here. But I think that could be something in your story of, I always have had to work on that. I know these things, I am capable, and that's sort of an internal villain that you have. And I guess I would say about, and this is just something that is a lifelong process in my experience of just really, when you're looking at your story and your potential employer story, and just really become an expert at what you know you can contribute and add. And I think in your field, it's really tough to have a visual representation of your competition, but you, just like everything, you have no idea what your employer really, it could be, you think they're fantastic. That's not what they're looking for. So and that applies to almost any field, is being fantastic is not the ultimate predictor. I can see lots of people that I've, worked with or for or around that you think, well, they're amazing. Why this? And it's like, because it's you. It's the unique set of that person was right for that role. You're right for another role. I'm right for another role. And we all might be equally talented or brilliant. And there's a million people who are way better at other things than I am. And I'm better than they are. You just have to find that unique match. So I know that's hard, but that's an ongoing thing. You just have to keep focusing on your own story and telling that over and over again.
Yeah, it sounds like it's the story that you're telling yourself. So I would challenge you to give yourself a better story.
Amen. Hey, I'm going to suggest we go into lightning mode here, lightning round mode, and see if we can do like one sentence answers so everybody gets their question addressed. The one I don't think we kind of talked plenty about AI, but here's some other good ones. Kim asks, how do you get noticed among the masses? And boy, my one sentence answer is that's kind of the whole purpose of this evening. It's finding that thing that differentiates you and being able to tell it really well and succinctly. Was that one sentence? It's close to one.
Close. Yeah, and I would say I've only ever got 2 of my, I think, 10 jobs from applying for a job posting online. All the rest has been through networking. So maybe think about who your allies are and who your mentors are, and build on those personal connections. Use your elevator pitches and your journey to do that. That might have been 2 sentences, Larry.
Plus one, plus one, plus one. Do you have some tips for expanding on the points we capture on the canvas, but still keeping it concise?
Really depends on your process. And of the partners at Stronger Stories, we all do it a little bit differently. Um, some of us will just create multiple canvases and throw them away. Others will make a really, really messy one and then a clean new one. Others will just force themselves to do what Larry is saying and do 3 to 5 word headlines for each box, which is a good exercise, harder to do. And usually starting with that messy canvas is the first step, and just know that's kind of part of the process. 3 sentences. Sorry, Larry.
And
The hardest bit is, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, my quick answer, and again, for better or for worse, this is where AI can help you. If you do all of this work and you give it the instructions and say, help me come up with some concise language and give me 4 or 5 options. And then between those, I've had some help of being like, oh, that it's combining a lot of your own thinking in a more concise way.
Pauline and Aileen, I think, asked different versions of the same question. The hardest bit is just getting someone to read your resume at all and not getting any responses after you apply. My sentence would be, That's the nature of online job applications. The only solution I know is you need a sponsor inside who is going to walk your application around. And
Yep.
yeah,
Unfortunately, and I know that's disheartening. I just want to say that because it's a lot harder. But if you can find a couple of areas where you at least have one connection or somebody who could make an introduction or somebody who might point you in the right direction, anything to just pull you out of that stack is going to help you. I mean, and it's the same idea. Almost everything I've ever gotten has been because I knew somebody. And it's the way kind of the world works. And it'll work for you too if it hasn't before. And doesn't mean I knew the boss. It means I knew somebody who could get me to the right place at the right time or could give me some advice of how to think about that company.
It's how I originally met Larry. I was talking to a recruiter. I think it was Dan Lee, Larry, like 5 or 6 years ago, who said, "Oh, what you're doing really sounds like School of Visual Concepts. You should go check out someone there and go talk to them." So you just never know where these
you're
things.
hired.
Ah,
Let's see here. I'm looking. I feel like I have to wedge keywords into my resume, and it's totally removing any feeling of authenticity. I have not. I don't know enough to answer that. Don't know what to say.
yeah, big companies, it's part of the way they screen. So you kind of have to do that if you're doing a mass application. Being aware of those keywords are important. But I would say as much as you can tie it back to your story, that's better. But it might be the story that you tell is more authentic once you get through to the next phase, unfortunately. And Jennifer, you might have a different take on it too, because there's
No, I think that's right, especially when you're starting out and a lot of those because so you kind of have to, it's like play the game to get through that filter and then but have the depth there. So when you break through, oh my gosh, now you stand out because you've got this great story. So if there's a way to combine both of those things, the have to haves with the really wonderful story you're going to tell.
Mhm.
Allison, again, thank you for helping us out tonight. And you were frustrated by just the amount of time you're spending applying and researching and probably not hearing back from people. And I think, Allison, you've already heard my pitch, which is I'm not a believer in applying for jobs. I think it's all about networking. So, but I would say this to you. I'm sorry, it is multiple sentences. The three elements anybody needs to get a job is you have to be really good at your craft, and you are. You have to be a really wonderful person that we all want to hang out with, and you are. And the third thing is you got to market yourself. And we talked about that tonight. That's kind of the whole point. So the good news is the two hardest things to be, which is skilled and a nice person, you've nailed it. And so now the effort is going to go into the marketing of yourself, and that's appropriate for where we are right now. So hang in there. Let's see, I'm scrolling down. Oh boy, big topic here, imposter syndrome. My answer is, guess what? We all have it. Move next question, please. We just do. Live with it. Is that a horrible answer?
There is someone asked about being in the same place for 12 years, so they don't know a lot of people outside my old organization. And I think I would say it's not only your professional network, it's also your personal network. Who do you know who works at a company that you want to work at? Or also a very tailored and thoughtful message to someone who has a job that you would be interested in having someday, or someone that you would like to be your boss.
Yes, or the best tip I got when I was younger is when I was in the same position, I was like, I don't even know how do you meet people, and start with people you find interesting and smart, because you never know who their networks are, and just start sharing what you're looking for. And they go, oh, somebody might go, oh, I know Bob over at so and so. So I just start buying people coffee, go to coffee, say, I'm on a job search. I'd love your advice. You seem to be a cool person in the world. Any advice? And then the key sentence is, if they're like, oh, this is really cool. And you say, any ideas of who I should talk to next? And they might go, yeah, you know, I'm going to introduce you to, you know, Susan over at blah, blah, blah. I'll send an email. And now you're on with Susan and you have a cool conversation with her. And it's kind of like you're just trying to keep the ball rolling, because if you prompt people, they really, you kind of have to ask, like, any ideas of who I might talk to next? Because, and then when people ask me that, I'm like, actually, just give them a second to think. And I go, yeah, actually, I know about 3 or 4 people you could talk to that I might not have thought to say in our cool conversation. So just kind of keep doing that. And people love to be helpful. They really do.
And I'm one of them. So there's my email address. Any of you want to get in touch with me and have a little chat about job hunting techniques, and especially portfolios and case studies. I think I've got something to add to that story. Happy to do it, and we can set up a time to talk. For now, though, thank you all of you for coming, and gigantic, huge thanks to Mickey and Jennifer for filling our brains. They do hurt a little bit, but I think that's all right. This was such great information. So good luck, everybody. Go
Yeah,
get
good luck out there, everyone. Hang in there.
Thanks,
here
everyone.
for
Thank you,
you.
Larry. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.